So even if you buy this bit about that the fires are what brought the building down, how do you explain, like you said, that there was minimal fire damage from the angle the plane hit the south tower, yet it came down first?
Right, and well, it's also even worse than that, because it turns out later they were hiding the radio transmissions of the firemen. As the firemen were climbing up the stairs here, they were sending reports on their radio to their station, you know, to tell them what's going on. And they were up in the fire zone of both towers. They're walking around up there, sending back reports. And in the south tower, they're saying, oh, there's only a few fires. And it matches exactly what the photographs show. The fires were only on the one side of the building where the plane hit. There were no fires on the other side. The fires never went from one side of the building to the other.
Now, can fire create the kind of temperatures necessary to cause a steel structure building? I know this is kind of what we talked about a little earlier.
Yeah, well, this is one of the other problems most people have. They think, well, jet fuel was burning. Well, jet fuel is a hydrocarbon like gasoline.
A hydrocarbon.
It doesn't have any magic properties. It's like diesel fuel or gasoline or candle wax or the stove, your butane or natural gas stove. It doesn't burn any hotter than these other hydrocarbons. And they cannot melt steel. If they could melt steel with it, they would have done it hundreds of years ago.
Right. So the fires were short-lived in the building, and we can show that picture of the black hole that shows no fires, and there's a woman and appearing to look out.
The fires were so small, and this is another thing people have to realize. These buildings are steel. The frame is steel. These are not wooden buildings. These are steel frames, and the flooring has got concrete. It's a steel corrugated steel pan on top of a steel floor, and there's concrete on it. There's nothing inside this building that can burn except carpeting, some office furnishing, and some paper. And
it's exhibited by the fact that the firemen ran into the building because they didn't expect it. The rescuers believed that this will be okay. We're going to go up and we're going to help people. We're not really in a dangerous situation.
No steel building has ever fallen down from fire. They've never even cracked into two pieces. It's impossible. If you design them properly, they don't fall down from fire. So the firemen went running up there, and they actually made it to the fire zone of both towers, which is a sign, if they're walking around in there, how hot could it possibly be?
Right.
It couldn't have been more than a warm summer day.
And again, I refer to that picture that you have in your book that's so amazing of the area where the jet crashed. It's now black. There's no fires raging. And here's a woman
who walks over here to look out the window.
Here she is peering out the window.
Or out the hole, I guess you'd call it. The hole by the engine. So people are walking around in there. There's a couple of them that had even passed through. They were in the above the fire zone. They went down the stairways. Now, if this was such an inferno, how are people walking around? How are firemen walking around? And why don't the photographs show the fires? When you look at the photos, all you see is black smoke.
Yeah.
You don't see flames. And then you compare that to the fire in Madrid, Spain, that just occurred not that long ago, in February, I think it was. That thing, the whole building looked like a torch after a while. It was burning almost the entire night. And it stood there, like you'd expect. It burned out.
And that is because, that's the question I was asking, because fire doesn't create that kind of heat to bring the steel.
Fire cannot bring down a steel building or a concrete building. It could bring down a house because the house is wood.
Now, folks are thinking, some folks out there who may be skeptical are thinking, yeah, well, the building came down, and I believe that there was some physics involved in creating that kind of heat. Okay, well, talk about that, how that heat could have happened.
The problem with the heat theory is there is nothing inside the building to burn. The hydrocarbons like the jet fuel, most of that burned off right in the beginning.
And I'm talking explosives.
Yeah, the only thing that can create the kind of, to bring down a building like this, especially when everything is broken at the joints, because this is the other thing about it. The building, you have to look at the rubble. The entire structure, both of them, all the way into the basements,
were neatly...
All of it. All floors, even down to the very, very bottom in the basements, the entire steel structure was just pulverized.
Pulverized the same way Building 7 was found as it came straight down into its own footprint.
Yeah, and so let's assume there is a fire here and a fire here. How does that go all the way down into the basement? And not just crack a few building parts, but it breaks every joint. There's thousands of joints here. Right. And then it does it in less than 10 seconds.
So the hot spots that they found and the heat temperatures that I'm referring to could happen from explosives only.
Yeah, you're referring to the temperatures after the towers fell, 5 days later, NASA sent an airplane flying over the area and was reading the temperatures by reading the infrared radiation that was coming from the rubble at this point. Okay. 5 days later, they are measuring spots in the rubble that's hot enough to melt aluminum. This is like 1,300 degrees at the South Tower and at Building 7. Now, you got to think about this. The towers fall down. The firemen go out there. They're spraying water on it. There was a few days of misting, rain. 5 days later, the top of the rubble is at the melting point of aluminum in a few spots. Now, how does a building fall down? 5 days later, you put aluminum on it and it melts. I mean, where does this heat come from?
What's your explanation for that?
There's only one way you can explain it. These things were brought down with explosives. There was a lot of heat in here from all the explosives. They may have had thermite, too, in here to help for some reason or another.
We were the first ones in the second tower after the plane struck. I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there was bombs set in the building.
We don't know exactly what they did, but it's a sign of explosives when you have this kind of temperature.
And you're talking about physics right now.
Yes, and the physics professors was looking at this too.
I'll read a little bit of that. I'm glad you brought it up. This is the Brigham Young
the Brigham
physics professor. His name is Stephen Jones, and I'll read his quote. He says, "It is quite plausible that explosives were pre-planted in all 3 World Trade Center buildings, which were actually a diversion tactic. The planes hitting the building, he believes, were a diversion tactic."
It caught your attention, especially the one that hit the South Tower with that big Hollywood-style fireball.
He's looked into this, and I think we're going to start, folks, I think we're going to start hearing from more experts soon.
Well, that's another good point. See, when I first came out with my book, this was in 2002, and of course I get ridiculed for being a conspiracy nut. Well, you know, it's been years. Every time people look into my book, they either become totally silent or they join with us. We're not losing support.
You're not losing support.
We are gaining it, and it's going worldwide. And it's even, stuff is getting translated. Like right now, I even have my DVD translated. It's in German. Someone decided to turn it into German. And I got my book in German. And
your book's available on Amazon?
Right. And just at my own website. But this is an important point. If I was wrong all this time, and if other people were wrong, why are we growing in support?
Right.
Every time people look, they either become quiet and go back into their room and, you know, like basically a dog with his tail between his legs, or they join with us.
Right. We want to get to the Pentagon. I want to get to also the air defense intercept problem, which folks who read David Ray Griffin's book said that was the most compelling area for them, was the air defense, why they didn't intercept. I want to get to that too. But before we get to those 2 areas, Building 7 and Silverstein, his quote in which he said on a PBS program, they just decided to pull it.
Well, yeah, he made this very bizarre quote, which he was saying, I got a call from the fire department commander telling me they were not sure they would be able to contain the fires in Building 7.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
And I said, you know, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Could you just explain to everyone that term, what that term means? It's slang.
Well, the demolition companies will use it to mean demolish the building or pull it down in some way.
The term is known
destroy the building
as a slang term, and he actually used it
to destroy.
In the context of his statement, there's no question. The context is that when he says they made the decision to pull it, he's talking about Building 7.
Yes.
And I know you've said that some people want to try to say he's talking about pulling out the battalion, but that doesn't fit the context of how he's speaking there.
Even if they're pulling out the battalion, it doesn't make sense to say, because replace it with battalion. And they made that decision to pull out the battalion, and then we watched the building collapse. I mean, that doesn't follow.
How do they know the building's going to collapse?
That's right. It's a steel frame building. Nothing he says makes any sense.
And it wasn't hit by a plane. Building 7 was not hit by a plane.